Honorable Prime Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, President-elect and greetings from Bhutan. My name is Sonam P. Wangdi. I serve as the Secretary of the National Environment Commission in the Royal Government of Bhutan, and I am also the chair of the LDC group in UN climate negotiations. It is my privilege and honor to be the facilitator for the high-level opening session. On behalf of the Royal Government of Bhutan and the 46 least developed countries, let me extend a warm welcome to you all to the Thimphu Ambition Summit. Thank you all for joining us today. The Thimphu Ambition Summit, Momentum for a 1.5 degrees Celsius world, is organized at this crucial moment to contribute to building global political momentum on climate action ahead of the Climate Ambition Summit on 12th December 2020, hosted by the UN, the UK, France, Chile, and Italy. As we approach the Climate Ambition Summit, marking the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, the existing commitments reflected in the current NDCs are far from enough to prevent warming from exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius, the commitment we collectively made in the Paris Agreement. The science tells us that limiting warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius remains possible. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in its special report on 1.5 degrees Celsius, has warned that unless the 2030 emission reduction targets in the new and updated NDCs are substantially strengthened and then fully implemented, limiting to 1.5 degrees Celsius will be out of reach. Our collective actions must lead to the halving of global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to align with 1.5 degree pathways. Warming over 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels will expose millions more people to devastating impacts of climate change. While the entire planet will share in these catastrophes, these impacts will fall heavily on the most vulnerable, such as LDCs. The 46 LDCs, representing 1 billion people, the poorest and most vulnerable, will be the hardest hit from the impacts. While COVID-19 crisis has moved to the forefront in political discussions, the climate crisis remains the biggest threat to human civilization. There is an existential need for faster, deeper emission reductions, building the capacity of countries to adapt and build resilience against climate shocks, and mobilize scaled-up finance to support vulnerable countries to address the climate crisis. Therefore, in the midst of a global health pandemic and the LDC's current internet connectivity challenges, the Thimphu Ambition Summit is convened to build political momentum on climate action for a 1.5 degrees Celsius world and provide a platform to showcase LDC's leadership on climate action. And one, call for countries to submit new and updated NDCs and long-term strategies. Two, demonstrate the need for international community to scale up climate finance. And lastly, identify post-COVID recovery options aligned with inclusive and green economic development pathways. With this brief background, it is my pleasure to begin facilitating the high-level opening of the Thimphu Ambition Summit. We are joined today by an impressive lineup of tall leaders who would be shaping the climate ambition dialogue in the lead up to COP26. Now it is my pleasure to welcome the leaders to share their thoughts at the high-level opening session. First, let me invite the Honorable Prime Minister of Bhutan, His Excellency Dr. Lote Tsering. His Excellency is by profession a surgeon. Bhutan is very fortunate to have him as a Prime Minister, especially in the current context of global health crisis. Not a single Bhutanese has been lost to this COVID pandemic. Thank you, Excellency, for your leadership. Excellency, you have the screen.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of conveying the greetings from His Majesty the King and the people of Bhutan. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Thimphu Ambition Summit. On behalf of the LDC Group, I have the honor to host this summit so that together we can build a political momentum on climate ambition and action for a 1.5 degree centigrade world. The year 2020 has been a challenge for all of us. As we continue to battle the pandemic, our hearts and prayers are with the families who have lost loved ones to COVID-19. I have highlighted in many of my talks that we can relate to this pandemic because we are able to see people suffering in front of our own eyes. But we often forget that, unlike the pandemic, the impact of climate change is far more devastating and irreversible. Both climate change and the pandemic affect smaller and underdeveloped nations more. The 46 LDCs, home to over 1 billion people, who are the poorest and most vulnerable, are the hardest hit. However, as we venture into an era of new normal, I see many opportunities to deliver a strong and sustainable climate response that will ensure not just the health of our people and the economy, but also that of our mother planet. We must ensure reduction of global greenhouse gas emission by 50% in the coming decade through green recoveries. Last year, at the UN Climate Action Summit, I had the opportunity to launch the LDC vision of climate resilient development pathway by 2030 and net zero emission by 2050, and we are all living by that vision today. A significant number of LDCs are planning to submit their new and updated NDCs by the end of this year, and we are counting on the support of the international community to help implement these plans. The remaining LDCs are in the process of preparing their new and updated commitments. I urge all other countries, especially those with greater emissions, to come forward with a more ambitious and concrete NDCs and, of course, to stand by it. Excellencies, Bhutan made the commitment to remain carbon neutral in the year 2009. This was reaffirmed ahead of COP21 in 2015 with the submission of Bhutan's NDCs. As a small, underdeveloped nation, we could have chosen a shorter path to rapid economic progress, but the wisdom of our monarchs guided us to the more sustainable climate path, which is why our constitution mandates the requirement of 60% forest cover at all times to come and maintaining intergenerational equity of our natural resources. That is the essence of developmental philosophy of gross national happiness. What other NDCs can be more reassuring than this? Yet, we will not remain complacent. We are also developing a national adaptation plan, enhanced NDCs, and a long-term, low-emission, climate-resilient development strategy that will ensure we remain carbon neutral at all times to come. As I conclude, Your Excellencies, I urge strong international cooperation and solidarity to address challenges of climate change and COVID-19. We must all work together, leaving no one behind. Let us secure a better future for our children. Thank you and Tashidele.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your inspirational message. Indeed, Bhutan is leading the way with its strong commitment to carbon neutrality and impressive environmental credentials. Now, let us hear from the Special Envoy of COP25 Presidency, His Excellency, Mr. Andreas Landereschi. As COP25 President, Chile has played a critical role in laying the foundation for ambitious climate action. Your Excellency, you have the screen.
Thank you so much, Chair. Distinguished ministers, authorities, and participants, it is a great pleasure to join you today and speak on behalf of Chile. I want to start by commending the leadership of the Royal Government of Bhutan and the chair of the LDC group in the UNFCCC, Mr. Sonam Wangdi, for convening this timely high-level virtual event. The Thimphu Ambition Summit is an important contribution to building global political momentum on climate action, on emission reductions, adaptation, and resilience, and the much-needed mobilization of climate finance for the most vulnerable. The profound socioeconomic crisis produced by COVID-19 has impacted the entire world and all of humanity, reminding us how vulnerable and fragile we are. As we all know, during this time, the climate emergency has not taken time off due to coronavirus. And while COVID-19 may have postponed COP26, it has not postponed the need for parties to deliver on their commitments under the Paris Agreement. Most importantly, the submission of more ambitious NDCs, climate strategies, this year 2020. Updating NDC is not an unnecessary distraction from the pandemic. On the contrary, new updated NDCs can be the beacon, establishing a blueprint to guide our sustainable economic recovery from COVID-19. Current NDCs were presented 5 years ago, and there is a clear opportunity to increase our collective ambition through bolder individual contributions. A real change will occur only if we take bold steps and evolve in the way we produce and consume with a long-term vision for sustainable growth. Chile has committed with great conviction to the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050, as requested by the science. Achieving this goal requires carrying out important changes in order to decouple the generation of emissions from our economic growth and strongly promote the transformation to a more sustainable and inclusive development. In April this year, Chile presented a significantly enhanced NDC that, in accordance with the Paris Agreement, aligns with Chile's long-term goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. In fact, we set this goal in our climate change bill that is under discussion right now in our Congress. The development of our new NDC was informed by extensive stakeholder engagement and consultation, and in particular, the advice of an independent scientific committee comprised of leading Chilean scientists. Our NDC represents a critical milestone on the road to net zero emissions, committing Chile to an absolute carbon budget for the period 2020-2030, and a series of other measures spanning adaptation and integrative actions on ocean, forest, circular economy, finance, and nature-based solutions. What I especially want to highlight is the inclusion of a social pillar in our NDC. This serves as an anchor for our climate commitments, connecting them to the Sustainable Development Goals, and committing us to develop a just transition strategy that will ensure livelihoods, particularly in the most vulnerable communities, are protected as we phase out coal from our energy system. Colleagues, as we reach the end of this challenging and disrupted year, it is right that we look ahead, that we look beyond the challenges of 2020 to COP26. To make Glasgow a success, there are, of course, a number of technical issues at the front of our minds, notably reaching agreement on Article 6, the enhanced transparency framework, and how to assess progress against the global goal on adaptation, among other areas. Just as we must leave no country behind, we can leave no issues behind, and we cannot let the pandemic stop progress and discussion. We must use all possible tools available, sometimes virtual, to continue to push this agenda forward. Building on June momentum and the recent climate dialogues, we must bring the same spirit of collaboration on shared goals to our work throughout 2021 and SB 52, approaching discussions with openness and empathy, working together to reach common ground. Most importantly, COP26 can and must be a COP of ambition. With all parties showing increased ambition on mitigation, adaptation, and finance, we can build the trust needed to unlock the negotiations. Ambitious NDCs and long-term strategies to net zero are absolutely vital. As we know, 2020 will be a year marked by COVID-19, but also by how governments and parties step up to take decisive climate action in these challenging circumstances, and to ensure that the reactivation of our economies is compatible with a zero carbon future. We have a big challenge in front of us, no doubt, but at the same time, we have a unique opportunity to use this crisis to accelerate our transformation to a more inclusive, cleaner, healthier, low carbon, and resilient economy for the world's future. I thank you for your attention. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellency, and to Chile for its
Thank you.
leadership of COP25 and on the road to COP26.
Thank you,
Next, we turn to COP26. President-designate, His Excellency, Mr. Alok Sharma. His Excellency is the Secretary of State for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy in the United Kingdom. The UK has recently announced ambitious climate commitments in their new NDC, demonstrating their commitment to lead by example in their COP26 presidency. We look upon your leadership for the delivery of climate ambition at COP26. Excellency, you have the screen.
Good evening. Thank you to Prime Minister Tisring and indeed the whole LDC group for inviting me to join you at this event and for the work that you do to tackle the climate crisis. Thank you also for Bhutan's historic pledge to remain carbon neutral and indeed for the NDCs announced today. I'm very pleased to say that the UK announced its NDC last week and as you will know, we have committed to cut the UK's emissions by at least 68% by 2030 on a 1990 baseline. This keeps us on the pathway to a 2050 net zero target. When I spoke to you in September, I emphasised the need for all of us to work together. And I believe that this event and the Climate Ambition Summit the UK is co-hosting on the 12th of December will very much help to boost ambition around the world. The ambition you have shown today will encourage others to announce strong commitments at our summit on Saturday. Commitments on emissions, on adaptation and on finance. And as I said to you in September, I am totally committed to the $100 billion goal, to making finance much more accessible and to championing locally led adaptation. At the Climate Ambition Summit on Saturday and at events throughout the coming year, I will be highlighting that adaptation is very much a shared priority. And I will be calling on donor countries to honour their climate finance commitments. As you know, the UK is committed to doubling its international climate finance to £11.6 billion over the next 5 years. And I'm pleased to say that there has been progress globally. There's been a 10% increase between 2017 and 2010, but we know that there is more to do to make the $100 billion a reality, to make finance more accessible and to get it to address the right challenges, particularly adaptation. So the UK continues to support programs like Life AR, which, led by you, the LDC countries, gets funds to a local level. In September, I also committed to making sure that your views are heard. Since then, we have convened the COP26 NGO group of Friends on Adaptation and Loss and Damage. And we hear your call to the world to increase its focus on averting, minimizing and addressing loss and damage. In the new year, we'll be holding further events to discuss the issues that matter to vulnerable countries. And over the next year, I want to engage with all of you to discuss your priorities for COP26 and to continue to work together so that we can realise the full potential of the Paris Agreement in Glasgow. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks, and we look forward to participating in the Climate Ambition Summit 2020, scheduled to take place on December 12th. And now I would like to turn to His Excellency, UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres. Your Excellency, under your leadership, the UN has demonstrated its commitment to increasing climate ambition, including finance. We look upon your leadership in driving climate ambition as this is central for the existence of humanity. Your Excellency, you have the screen.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming together for this Ambition Summit to build momentum for a 1.5-degree world. Ambition is precisely what the world needs to tackle the climate emergency. We see the threat all around us, in collapsing biodiversity, melting glaciers, disappearing ecosystems, spreading deserts, acidifying and overfished oceans, dying coral reefs, sky-high temperatures. Apocalyptic fires and floods, cyclones and hurricanes are the new normal. Least developed countries are on the front lines and are paying the heaviest price. People in least developed countries, for example, are at least 4 times more likely to be displaced by extreme weather than in high-income countries. It is clear that climate change drives and deepens inequalities across and within countries. Fighting climate change is a matter of social justice. We need to use the recovery from COVID-19 to put us back on track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and to win the battle against climate change. That means attaining the goals of the Paris Agreement. It means limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It means building a global coalition for carbon neutrality, and we are on our way. By early next year, countries representing more than 65% of global carbon dioxide emissions and more than 70% of the world economy will have made ambitious commitments to carbon neutrality. A quantum leap towards carbon neutrality will not be possible without developing countries. They will need significant support. This means taking into account in good faith the common but differentiated responsibilities of one and all, and accompanying developing countries in the adoption and the achievement of ambitious goals in mitigation and adaptation. For this, we need developed countries to fulfill their climate finance commitments. That includes the decade-long goal of mobilizing $100 billion a year for mitigation and adaptation. We are not there yet. It must also ensure that decisive action is taken in the boards of multilateral, regional and national development banks. They must do more to collaborate, provide substantial concessional climate finance to developing countries, and rethink their mobilization potential to unlock the trillions held by institutional investors. I'm also asking governments, as well as international financial institutions, to work with you on addressing debt and liquidity to liberate resources to achieve the SDGs and the goals of the Paris Agreement. Even as we strive to mitigate emissions in the future, we need to cope with the impacts happening here and now. Adaptation to present and future climate impacts, particularly for least developed countries and small island developing states, cannot be the forgotten component of climate action. Until now, adaptation represents only 20% of climate finance, reaching only $30 billion on average in 2017 and 2018. Before COP26, all donors and the multilateral development banks should commit to increase the share of adaptation and resilience finance to at least 50% of their climate finance support. We need to move to large-scale, preventive and systemic adaptation support. Excellencies, 5 years ago, the leadership of LDCs, SEEDs and landlocked developing countries was instrumental in securing the ambitious climate goals of the Paris Agreement. Today, I salute your efforts to push all countries to submit more ambitious nationally determined contributions ahead of COP26 in Glasgow. And I join your call for the mobilization and scaling up of finance and support to meet the needs on the ground. I also urge you to continue aligning your development and recovery plans with the Sustainable Development Goals and ambitious climate action. Doing so will create jobs and opportunities while also protecting our people and economies. The Climate Ambition Summit on December 12th will be a key opportunity to send all of these messages loud and clear. Together we can emerge from this crisis stronger, more sustainable and more resilient. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your kind remarks and inspirational messages. Every word of yours matters and counts to the member states. Finally, we have Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, Her Excellency, Ms. Patricia Espinosa. Her Excellency has been working tirelessly to ensure the success of Paris Agreement, including through scaled up ambition and implementation. Your Excellency, you have the screen.
Good afternoon. I thank the chair of the LDC Group under the leadership of the Royal Government of Bhutan for hosting this important summit. In this, the most challenging of years, we are beset with a dual crisis of COVID-19 and a climate emergency that continues to worsen. There are no silver linings in these global emergencies, particularly when they have had such a devastating impact on so many, especially the most vulnerable. But in 12 months, we've learned valuable lessons from them. The most important? That coordination, trust, and solidarity are the only ways forward if we are to build forward from COVID-19, finalize and implement the Paris Agreement, table robust NDCs and boost climate ambition, and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We cannot achieve any of this through isolation. Yet, in a year when hope is hard to find, we must not give in to despair. We see momentum for the climate change agenda growing like we haven't seen since the signing of the Paris Agreement. We see more and more nations acknowledging that the convergence of the COVID-19 and the climate change emergencies has opened a window of opportunity. An opportunity not simply to recover from a virus, but to build forward, to build cities and communities that are safe, healthy, green, and sustainable. The Paris Agreement already provides a framework for this work to begin. And many of the programs and policies needed for this great building forward can be expressly stated now as nations are committed to submit enhanced NDCs in 2020. These plans must be as robust as possible, reflecting the urgency of our present crisis while planning for a clean, green, sustainable future. If nations delay yet another 5 years to table stronger plans, our window of opportunity will likely be closed. I remind all nations that submissions of NDCs in 2020 are key elements in the Paris Agreement process. Truly honoring the Paris Agreement as we approach its 5th anniversary means honoring all commitments under it. Speaking of commitments, we know that multilateralism is only as solid as the trust it's built upon. And trust can only be established when mutual pledges are kept. Nowhere in our process is this more important than the mobilization of the 100 billion commitment by developed to developing nations. In just a matter of months, we have seen more than 12 trillion unleashed for recovery packages to COVID-19. This puts the issue of the 100 billion into sharp perspective. Developed nations must understand that it's not a donation. It's an act of enlightened self-interest. The finance commitment is a central element for success in the climate agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you have a full schedule ahead of you. We are at a crucial point in history. These are difficult times, but never have we had such an opportunity to shape the future like we do right now. I congratulate you for your work and look forward to the day when we can once again speak in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We appreciate your leadership and keeping the momentum on climate dialogue in these difficult times. It is a great honor to hear our leaders today. On behalf of all of us here, I would like to thank them and also welcome their messages and dedication to scale up ambition to address the global climate crisis for a better future. Excellencies and distinguished audience, now I would like to invite your attention to the launch of the ambition statements from Bangladesh, Burkina Faso, Cambodia, Ethiopia, the Gambia, Madagascar, Malawi, Nepal, and Vanuatu. These statements are available on our website. The website link will be provided in the chat box. We invite participants to view in your own time to listen to our country's commitments towards climate action, including messages on ambition, support needs, and COVID recovery plans. Let's now turn our attention to the second part of the event, an interactive panel session with leaders from least developed countries and partners in this process. To guide through this session, I would like to hand over to Mr. Naveen Singh Khadka from Nepal. Mr. Khadka is an environment correspondent with BBC World Service. He has been reporting on the impacts of climate change and the UN climate negotiations for over 20 years. He is no stranger to the devastating impacts of climate change and has closely monitored developments in the climate negotiations. It is my pleasure to hand over the floor to Mr. Khadka to take us through the next part of the Thimphu Ambition Summit. Mr. Khadka, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to all who are just joining. My name is Naveen Singh Khadka, and I'm an environment correspondent with the BBC World Service. It's my pleasure to be moderating this panel today. We hope the conversation today will not only showcase the unique opportunities coming out of the process for LDCs, the least developed countries, but it will facilitate a dialogue among these least developed countries and fellow climate allies on the common challenges and concerns they face. We also expect to hear some exciting new announcements today on the website launched by the LDC chair that you heard a few minutes ago. I ask those of you who are present with us now to participate by raising questions. We want to hear from you. Please use the question and answer box, and note if you have a specific question for a specific panelist. And even if you don't have a question, feel free to upvote those questions you would most like the panelists to answer. We'll start this session with a keynote speaker to set the scene for us and highlight the challenges and opportunities LDCs face. Her Excellency Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh. I give the floor to Her Excellency Prime Minister Hasina.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. His Excellency Dr. Lotte Sherin, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, His Excellency Alok Sharma, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good evening. I thank the Royal Government of Bhutan, the chair of the LDC group in the UNFCCC, for organizing this Ambition Summit on the occasion of the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement to create momentum for a 1.5 degree Celsius world. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us how quickly a pandemic can turn into a catastrophic global crisis. And it has also taught us that the only way to combat a global crisis is through strong collective response. Excellencies, during COP21 in Paris, we have agreed to a landmark agreement to combat climate change and achieve climate resilience. Our target was to keep the global temperature rise within 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, we must admit that our current efforts to achieve that target are highly inadequate. As such, we need forceful, dynamic, and rapid action plan to limit the global greenhouse gas emission to save us and our planet. Dear friends, South Asia is the most vulnerable region to climate-induced natural disasters. Millions of people will become climate refugees in coastal and small island countries if sea level rises by a meter. The glacial lake outbursts, cloud outbursts, or heavy rains will bring catastrophic impacts on Himalayan countries like Bhutan, Nepal, and parts of India. Though Bangladesh has no contribution in global warming, it is one of the most vulnerable countries for its limited coping capacities and specific geographical features. As per ADB's prediction, Bangladesh would face annual economic cost equivalent to 2% of her GDP by 2050 and up to 9.4% by 2100 if current emissions continue. I'm sure that it is true for all other LDCs and climate vulnerable countries. However, we have taken excellent adaptation and mitigation activities to enhance our climate resilience. This year, we are planting 11.5 million trees across the nation, marking the Mujib Borsho, the birth centenary of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. We have also launched Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan to mobilize resources for a secured future. Excellencies, Bangladesh has been honored to be chosen to lead the Climate Vulnerable Forum for the second time. We have established the Regional Office of Global Center on Adaptation for South Asia in Dhaka. We have launched the CVF Midnight Survival Deadline for the Climate initiative for all nations to deliver new and enhanced NDCs by midnight on 31st December 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to flag that the Paris Agreement reaffirmed the obligations of the developed countries for mobilizing climate finance. MDBS, IFIS should come forward for more vigorous provision of climate financing through concessional finance and debt relief and ensure the access to technology for all. Moreover, extreme weather events are already displacing many more people than violent conflicts. Therefore, the loss and damage provision should be mainstreamed. Likewise, relocation and protection of displaced persons need due focus in global discourses to ensure their protection. Excellencies, I would like to underscore the significance of positive and robust international climate coalitions that can reduce the global carbon emission effectively to move towards carbon neutrality before the mid-century. So, I called for your urgent and decisive action to save our future generations. UNFCCC remains the most appropriate platform to push forward our global agenda. Thank you all.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh. International Climate Coalition, that's the term that's gaining currency now. With that, let me introduce our panelists today. So we have from Ethiopia, His Excellency Commissioner Professor Fikadu Bigain, who leads the Environment, Forest and Climate Change Commission. We also have a youth leader who has been on the front lines of fighting climate impacts, in Bhutan, Ms. Tinley Choden. Representative from the Alliance of Small Island States, AOCs, we have His Excellency Minister Orlando Habit of Belize. From the European Union, we have His Excellency Mr. Ugo Astuto, EU Ambassador to Bhutan. And last but not the least, we're joined by Green Climate Fund Executive Director, Mr. Yannick Klimarek. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us today. can I start with this knowledge we all have, what scientists have told us, that countries need to come up with more ambitious climate action plans to limit global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. And therefore, you heard all our speakers stressing on this word, ambition, ambition, ambition. This question, can I ask to Professor Fekudu? Your country has committed to an updated NDC, which basically is the climate action plan each country has to prepare and submit to the UN Climate Convention. Can you please share with us how your NDC is more ambitious than the first one, and how will you achieve its major targets, particularly at this difficult time?
Thank you, Mr. Karka. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, warm greetings from Addis Ababa. Concerning Ethiopia's ambition, Ethiopia communicated its first NDC in 2015. Is anchored on the climate resilient green economy strategy, which is launched in 2011 to pursue an ambitious aspiration to build a carbon neutral and resilient economy by 2030. In line with the Paris Agreement, we are now on the verge of completing the process of updating our NDC. The endeavor of updating our NDC consists, among others, raising ambition in mitigation and ambition in adaptation and the transparency. Although Ethiopia accounts for only 0.04% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, we have set an ambitious NDC goal of reducing 64% below the business as usual scenario of greenhouse gas emission by 2030. We have been considering ways where we can fully realize this ambitious target set up in our first NDC. Besides, given that our first NDC leaned towards more mitigation, we have been working to raise adaptation ambition in our second NDC. To this end, the updated NDC will have quantifiable and feasible national and sectoral adaptation targets with respective indicators that will guide regional and subnational and sectoral adaptation implementation. As part of the endeavor to raise ambition, we are also considering new sectors that were not part of our first NDC. The case in point is the health sector, which was targeted as a key sector for the climate resilient green economy strategy, and that is now elevated as a critical sector for adaptation, particularly in light of high public health challenges such as COVID-19 are proving to be major socio-economic disruptors. Above all, the revision process will also help us to align the NDC to our national development policies and the strategies, including the newly adopted 10-year perspective development plan, which ranges from 2020 to 2030. To realize our ambitious targets, we have been following a sectoral approach whereby the planning and implementation of our NDC are mainstreamed across key sectors, both at the federal and regional levels. And our updated NDC will be part and parcel of the 10 years perspective development plan. Then it will be mainstreamed into sectoral ministries, annual 5 years and 10 years plans. This will in turn necessitate strong political commitment and leadership, active engagement as the public and at large and sufficient allocation of resources from the national treasury, complemented by bilateral and multilateral financial resources and carbon markets. Support from the developed country parties remains critical to implementing our ambitious NDC. To this end, developed countries need to scale up their climate finance supports and also fulfill their commitment to providing new and additional finance. I thank you.
Can I also follow up this as a follow-up thing? So you talked about your targets, your increased ambition, raised ambition, which does must inspire so many other countries. Now, after being cancelled this year, the UN climate conference that was supposed to be happening in Glasgow this year, so now it's going to happen next year. And so countries are now expected to come up with their ambitious climate action plans that the way you were explaining earlier before that important meeting. And in that regard, all eyes are on industrialized countries, developed countries in that context in particular. What are your expectations and how will you engage with them?
Thank you. Our main expectation is that the developed country parties should submit their most ambitious NDCs before the end of 2020. We need more ambitious from all countries in order to limit the global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels, as well as set in the Paris Agreement. And thus, the postponement of COP26 should not be taken as a pretext to postpone climate actions, both nationally and globally. Similarly, the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic should not be a reason to delay the submission and implementation of ambitious NDCs. In the spirit of keeping the drumbeat of ambition alive, all parties need to continue to fulfill their commitments. To this end, it's important to use both formal and informal platforms within and outside the UNFCCC process to urge all parties, particularly the developed countries, to submit their ambitious NDCs. Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, can I ask you, like, you know, you've been trying to do all this, as you explained, and despite the difficulties, particularly in that part of Africa, already, you know, battered by extreme weather events and so on and so forth. I mean, and then we also have this situation of the pandemic. So are you able to communicate with representatives from rich countries in regards to these ambitions? I mean, do the reps from the industrialized countries, rich countries, do they have time for this now to talk to you, to explain what's going on? Is that happening? Just quickly.
Yes, we are doing our best. We are using formal and informal forums to communicate with the developed countries to keep up to their commitments and raise their ambition, as well as also keep their promises of supporting the developing countries in order to meet their obligations. We are doing our best in all events we are getting, and most of them are in supportive of this idea.
Thank you, Professor Fegedo. That was really encouraging. Now, leadership, as you know, it comes in many forms. And in addition to the political leaders we have here on the stage, a youth leader is joining us today. I mean, does that not bring you all those youth communities around the world taking to the street, or how they galvanize the international climate negotiations? It keeps coming to me. I've been seeing them for years now. So, and I want to ask our youth representative, what question would you like to ask our leaders on the stage?
Thank you. With much gratitude, I thank the LDC chair and his team for this opportunity to deliver the voices and concerns of youth in this summit. So I personally am wearing several hats right now. I am the founding curator for Global Shapers Thimphu Hub, which is a fairly new hub established in March this year. And we are part of a larger youth network of over 12,000 young people spread across a network of 430 hubs in 150 countries. I'm also a climate reality leader of the Climate Reality Project, a leadership network of over 21 individuals in 154 countries. Finally, and most importantly, I'm a Bhutanese citizen and a representative of the Bhutanese youth. So kindly allow me to speak a few thoughts to set the context for the questions I will raise from these three perspectives: global youth, LDC youth, and the Bhutanese youth. Globally, we are living in a period of convergence of three crises: economic, climate, and COVID, which puts greater responsibility on enlightened and wise leadership, which I feel assured given the statements earlier. For the danger is that these crises could potentially be pitted against each other. Everyone is calling this period a moment of great reset to build back better, and the young people have great faith that the narrative will translate into action. We have no choice but to have faith and hope. While being hopeful, young people world over are doing what they do best at the grassroots: self-organizing, disrupting, and creating movements by using the digital platforms to their advantage. From large-scale climate strikes to individual and community-specific entrepreneurial undertakings, to artistic and musical expressions, to to political and coalition building, to climate education, to conscious lifestyle change and adaptation, and to the choices they make. Young people are active. But young people can only go so far. We are not in the boardrooms of corporates and businesses, in the cabinets of political parties, policy-making rooms of governments. We need the powers to be to join us, to meet each other where we are. We need intergenerational allyship. We need you, the honorable speakers and panelists, but more importantly, the ones who are not here, especially big businesses and the corporates. Climate change and green economy are also business opportunities, and many recognize that. Of course, there are cynicisms, youth tokenism, greenwashing, highlighting small good deed to hide the bigger ugly truth, cherry-picking the SDGs, and so on. But these cynicisms only mean that young people are aware and know the space they're working to change. For young people, we want system change, not climate change. So the question is, how can governments and leaders cultivate safe and creative spaces for youth to understand, engage with, and influence climate policy? Now, if I may shift from global youth to LDC youth. The world is unequal, therefore we have the term LDC made out of 46 countries. Generally, young people face systemic and structural barriers, but LDC youth face it even more due to political, economic, and socio-cultural contexts. An extreme example, which I'm sure everyone here will acknowledge, is if you're too poor, your priority is survival, not climate change. You do not have the bandwidth and the means to think beyond. Even if you have the knowledge and thought space of climate change crisis, you may not have the safe space or the capacity or enabling environment to organize, build solution, influence decision and policy, because larger and more overwhelming interests and powers are at play. Lastly, even if we have all the above, we fall short in scaling and sustaining due to lack of influence, funds, or other forms of support and amplifiers. So we call on the moral responsibility and leadership of the developed, the politically and economically powerful countries, and pose this question: how can the world powers be more inclusive and supportive of the LDC youth's voices, concerns, and action in the solution building movement, and more importantly, facilitate space and collaboration with your young people and the LDC youth? Now, lastly, let me speak from the perspective of the Bhutanese youth. Bhutan's climate story is very different from many LDCs. We are lucky to be bestowed with wise leadership of our kings, the government, for the enlightened environmental stewardship, ushering us to our current environmental landscape, which has gained us worldwide acclaim and admiration. We are currently the only carbon negative country, but there are a few buts. But climate knows no boundary, and I'm sure I need not explain further on this. But Bhutan is modernizing, our social, cultural, and economic landscape is changing. Our lifestyle is changing with economic progress and increase in living standard. Our per capita energy consumption is increasing, along with a per capita waste and a consumption in general. Our built environment is energy inefficient. Our fossil fuel import exceeds our hydropower export. We, the people, are part of the national landscape. Our choices, actions, and decisions play a huge role in shaping the future of our environment and climate. Moving into the future, how can we, Bhutanese citizens, sustain and nurture the generous environmental inheritance we received? What can we do to help our trees, our forests, our rivers, and lakes? To ensure that I bring the Bhutanese youth's voice on this forum, I crowdsourced questions from the Global Shapers Thimphu Hub. Allow me to state them here, and I hope these will spark further deliberations in and outside Bhutan and beyond this forum. The first question: what efforts or suggestions are being made to incorporate local knowledge, language, and cultural values into climate education and awareness? The second question: was import a parameter while measuring our carbon emissions in Bhutan? What are our plans to shift to a more sustainable and green import? the third and the last. What are the green career opportunities now and of the future within the context of LDC and the Himalayas? And if I may add so to these questions, what role can the youth play in partnership with the government to address the above? And quickly in conclusion, I would like to say future is what we make today. Likewise, youth is part of the journey of being an adult. I urge everyone here to think back to the time when you were a young person. What were your aspirations? What was your driving force? Would your younger self be happy and proud of the state of the world today and the role you play? If not, what can you do to truly help and empower the young? If yes, what can you do to truly amplify the good? Thank you and Tashdale.
Thank you. Thank you, Tinley Choden. That was really, really inspiring. And I really like the question of the present that would answer how would the future be, the future of these very youths and across the world. Can I once again remind you, please submit your questions via the question and answer box directly underneath the live stream window. Viewers listening in French are welcome to type their questions in French. And everyone please upvote questions and we'll see to it that we will address your questions. Can I now move on to our other panelists? And this, I would like to talk to the EU rep, His Excellency, Mr. Ugo Astuto, EU Ambassador to Bhutan. As you know, the European Green Deal, now just when we had this pandemic, as you know, for the past 1 year, the gloom and doom, but in the meantime, to be honest, I, as a correspondent, when I had to report, then people would ask me, give us some good news as well. So the Green Deal coming out of EU, the European Green Deal, was one of those things that we talked about. Now, I'm not saying that it's already happening, but we heard a lot of things about it. Massive attention were drawn, and it's being seen as key influencers for global climate action. We're hearing huge budget figures for green recovery. So green recovery, again, the term that we heard earlier. Does it also have anything for the poorest and most vulnerable communities that we've been talking about, who have been the worst hit by the double whammy of the pandemic and climate change? Can I ask you that question, please?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, if I may, let me at the outset thank the organizers for inviting me, and let me commend the Royal Bhutanese government and the LDC group for convening this gathering today. It's a very timely moment in the run-up to COP26. Obviously, COP26, as other speakers have said, has been delayed by 1 year, but we have no time to waste, in the sense that we need to act fast and to push back against climate change and biodiversity. And that's precisely the reason why the European Union has put the Green Deal at the heart of its recovery package. Over the next 2 years, governments all around the world will spend 10 trillion euro to recover in the wake of COVID. And we need to use this investment to build back better, as the UN Secretary General said. We need to invest in an economy which is fit for the 21st century, an economy which is green, digital, and resilient. The European Green Deal is at the core of the recovery package, at the core of our strategy to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. In order to do so, what we are setting in place the necessary tools in terms of the next EU budget, which, as you say, offers pretty significant figures. We have also, our budget will also underpin by the philosophy of the fact that at least 30% of the funds need to be dedicated to fighting climate change. That's the highest share ever. And the other funds in other activities, well, we need to make sure that they're never used in activities potentially detrimental to climate action. So we follow a do no harm, principle as an overall compass. An important part of the European Green Deal is the need to ensure a just transition. This is valid domestically, obviously, where we are mobilizing 100 billion of public and private investment to support the necessary reskilling, for instance, of workers who are currently employed in sectors which are carbon intensive. This is in the European Union. But when it comes also to the international dimension, well, with the Team Europe approach, the European Union and its member states remain the largest contributor of international public climate finance for adaptation purposes, and particularly for least developed countries and small island development states. So we remain strongly committed to the existing climate finance goals, which have been evoked earlier. We contribute significantly to the collective goal of mobilizing $100 billion a year by 2020 and through 2025 for climate action in developing countries. Through a variety of sources, instruments, and channels. And let me mention, for instance, the figures that in 2019, the European Union contributed 21 billion euro, with an increase of 7.4% compared to 2018. So I think that in short, the European Union is walking the talk, and we do realize that obviously the finance is also an essential component in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we are strongly committed to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I mean, you did mention adaptation to some extent, but then when we were talking about Green Deal, there's also this impression that it's so much focused on mitigation. Would it also prioritize adaptation? We just heard from the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, who said not even 20% is now going to adaptation, the figures that we saw, recent figures. So again, for the poorest and most vulnerable communities, do you think adaptation would get the due attention?
Well, clearly mitigation is key because we need to limit the global temperature increase if we want to be able to cope with the overall impact of climate change. So that's essential. But the Green Deal and Green Recovery also mean embracing climate change adaptation and resilience. These are key drivers for a more sustainable environment and economy. So reducing emissions and adaptation to climate change must go hand in hand. These are two equally important building blocks of the Paris Agreement. Adaptation, disaster risk reduction can bring positive economic, social, environmental benefits. We need to reduce the risk, increase productivity, and drive innovation. So the European Union wants to help developing countries to pursue sustainable and climate resilient growth. And the youth development assistance and cooperation will maintain a comprehensive and green approach in the context of COVID recovery. As I said earlier, the European Union is the largest source of global funding for climate change adaptation, and we have a good experience, solutions, and tool to share to strengthen climate adaptation.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ugo Astuto, EU Ambassador to Bhutan, thank you so much for your kind response. Moving on to the other much talked about organization, which is supposed to be the global climate financing mechanism, the global green fund, the Green Climate Fund. Now, we've heard from less developed countries that securing support to implement their climate action is a massive challenge. Can I ask the Executive Director, GCF, Mr. Yannick Clemaric, how development partners and international finance institutions are answering the call to support the most vulnerable countries and communities, please?
Many thanks, Navin, for this question. First, I would like to express my pleasure to have been invited to participate in the Ambition Summit. And I would like to recognize the achievements of LDCs in addressing climate change. Often, with very limited resources, they have taken on some of the most ambitious targets. And there is right now a major momentum toward the carbon neutrality by 2050, 2060. And it's important to recall that a number of LDCs are already carbon neutral and are already making extremely strong commitments to remain carbon neutral. And notably, Bhutan is carbon neutral and intends to remain carbon neutral with its commitment to keep 60% of its forest cover. And GCF is extremely proud to be associated with the government of Bhutan and WWF in supporting this initiative through our Bhutan for Life project. So what are we doing to respond to this call for additional financing for the most vulnerable? What are we doing in order to facilitate access of LDCs to finance? We have adopted a three-pronged approach. The first one is that we prioritize the most vulnerable countries in our programming allocation. As of today, LDCs account for about 30% of the total resources of the Green Climate Fund. We allocate 50% to mitigation, 50% to adaptation, and half of the 50% for adaptation are for the most vulnerable, the LDCs, African states, and the seeds. So in our own programming, we have a very clear prioritization. We have also, our second program is a number of initiatives to enable developing countries to more easily access our resources, more easily develop ambitious initiatives. And so, for example, one of our mechanisms is project development funds, where we can provide to LDCs the resources we need to often develop their first ever projects that will access international finance. Right now, 31 countries have benefited from this program, and 18 of the 31 are from LDCs. We have also developed a certain number of modalities that should make it faster for LDCs to access our resources. Notably, we have developed a simplified approval process for projects up to $10 million that basically can go in an expedited manner through our project appraisal processes. We are also trying to develop the capacity of national development banks, entities from LDCs, to directly develop the projects, rather than having to rely on an international partners. And for example, we allocated during our last board meeting 47 of our resources to direct access entities, and notably a very large program for Bangladesh, more than $250 million, developed by IPCO, a Bangladeshi development bank. The third pronged approach is to go beyond our resources, beyond our capacity to co-finance ambitious initiatives from LDCs, and to try to basically change the way some financing mechanisms are being used. Over the past couple of decades, there's been a lot of emphasis on blended finance, public-private partnership, where we use public money to de-risk private investment. And so the idea is excellent in principle, in the sense that you use $1 of taxpayer money, maybe to mobilize $20 of private investment, and you align private investment with sustainable development. In practice, it doesn't work that way. In practice, it works well for mature technologies in mature markets. And this doesn't work at all for LDCs and seeds, by and large. And doesn't work for ecosystem, doesn't work for adaptation. And so what we are trying to do is that we are trying to make blended finance work for the most vulnerable. And so, for example, one of our projects approved during our last board 2 weeks ago was about providing private equity capital at the subnational level. and for renewable energy, energy efficiency, solid waste management. And there we were able to create a coalition of 42 countries. Because we were able to reduce the country risk, 13 LDCs ended up being able to join the program. And what we did was we told the private investors, we will basically provide you $150 million of first loss equity. If somebody loses money, we are the first one. With this one, they were able to mobilize $600 million of more senior equity and after leverage private finance. And so we allocate a chunk of our resources. We have developed specific mechanisms for LDCs, and we are trying to change the way blended finance work.
Thank you. You know, when we are talking about all this, again, the pandemic, you know, and then has it eclipsed the climate agenda? So now what's going to happen and so on and so forth. In the midst of this, again, it was kind of a hope, let's say, a positive kind of thing to see your organization bringing out this press statement saying that we've approved, what was it, above $1 billion kind of thing, to the tune of above $1 billion. Yeah, I mean, this is quite, you know, I mean, again, amidst all this, we're getting to see that, okay, things are happening. But again, the question here is, again, when I talk to less developed countries, the accessibility to funding and the priority, as you heard, again, once again, the same reference to the UN Secretary General, just 20% of the money going to adaptation. Does that concern you? Does that concern you?
Of course. Maybe I will start with adaptation, and I would like to come back to the need to green the economic stimulus measures that are being designed to revive economies. Today, in the 50s, we thought we had 8,000 years before we would cross the 2 degrees Celsius threshold. When I started my career, we thought that we had more than 100 years. Today, we know that we have 10 years. If we do not take action within the next 10 years, we will not be able to meet the Paris Agreement. And so what we have discovered is that the level of risks, the wall, is coming fast, is coming faster and faster and faster. But another thing, and that's the reason why we have to invest a lot in the mitigation. But another thing we have learned is that the threshold of risk is much lower than what we thought. When I started my career, we thought that we will have to wait for 4 or 5 degrees Celsius before ecosystems could collapse. Today, we know that we could see a collapse of the coral reef ecosystem after 1.5 degrees Celsius. So basically, our threshold, our 2 degrees Celsius threshold is coming 10 times faster than what we thought, and the implication of that threshold are much, much higher than what we thought. So we have no choice. We have to raise ambition for mitigation and raise ambition for adaptation. And that's the reason why the Green Climate Fund allocate 50% of its resources to adaptation, 50% to mitigation, and we try to optimize synergies between the two. I've mentioned one equity fund where we have a number of LDCs with us, but we are financing another one called ARAF. It's the Acumen Resilient Climate Fund, where we provide equity finance to small and medium enterprises for climate resilient agriculture. And so it would be a dramatic error to say, okay, first, no, I focus on mitigation, resource on adaptation, or vice versa. We need to do both, and we need to do both in a synergetic manner. I would like to say maybe one word, if I can still take a minute, on your point about the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and is it to dislodge a priority given to climate change? That would be a very bad thing if it were to happen. First, it does not need to happen. Countries do not have to trade recovery, economic recovery against climate change. Because if you look at some of the most important activities for climate change, such as renewable energy, energy efficient building, ecosystem protection, climate resilient agriculture, what do they have in common? They are extremely employment rich. And a lot of these activities, such as, for example, ecosystem restoration or climate resilient agriculture, do not need you to retrain people. So they are employment rich immediately. And so some of the best initiatives to revive economies are also those you need for maintaining climate ambition. So we need to green economic stimulus measures. And why do we need it from a climate viewpoint? There was an excellent article in Nature recently, and basically saying that if we can green aggressively economic stimulus measures, we could remain below 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. If we do not do it, if we follow the trajectory that we have right now, where the economic stimulus measures are not really green, we could reach 1.8, 1.9 degrees Celsius by 2050. That means we can forget about the Paris Agreement. So we need to green the economic stimulus measure because it's the most efficient manner to revive economies in a fair way and providing jobs to the youth. We need to green economic stimulus measures because if we do not do that, we will dramatically close our windows of opportunity.
Thank you, Green Climate Fund Executive Director, Mr. Yamik Clemic. Can I move on to our other panelists? So this is for Alliance of Small Island States. His Excellency, Mr. Minister Orlando Habit of Belize. Well, I needn't be telling you this. We all know this, that climate change is a global problem and it requires a global solution. That's why we are talking like this. That's why we are pinning our hope on the upcoming summit and so on and so forth. And of course, it also requires local action. As a strong ally with LDCs for progressive climate action, when you say the ally with LDC, I remember, was this not during Copenhagen when you joined force, AOCs and LDC joined force for 1.5 degree ambition, just then because countries were so unsuccessful to seal the deal, but you're talking about 1.5 since then. Can you share with us the importance of global cooperation in this regard? How will that ensure that needs and priorities of the most vulnerable are met?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And thank you to the conveners of the Thimphu Ambition Summit for bookending this tumultuous year with a message of hope. In April, the Group 1 represent the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, which hosted the Placencia Ambition Forum. At that time, we saw a grave risk and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a risk that the climate agenda would be completely overwhelmed by the global pandemic, and an opportunity that, in fact, both our response to the climate crisis and the health crisis could once and for all put us on track to a more resilient and climate secure future. To do so would require cohesion of vision, solidarity of efforts, and commitment to bold action in line with a multilateral agenda already designed to drive a global reset, informed by science, and aim to protect and uplift those furthest behind, the vulnerable. You could say that the very logic for global cooperation to robustly respond to COVID-19 is the very logic for global cooperation to robustly respond to halt global warming. Moreover, the timeline for both responses are completely aligned. In the same way that we have had to act with urgency on the pandemic, so too must we on climate. We do not have the luxury of delaying climate action. Today, I would like to make 3 brief points about the urgent need for action, the need for greater ambition and new nationally determined contributions this year, and 2, the need for greater levels of finance to operationalize ambition, and 3, the need to focus on the sectoral level in order to leverage greater opportunities for mitigation and adaptation actions. The delay of COP26 does not mean that climate action must cease or even be diminished. It is our responsibility to take collective action to maintain the drumbeat of ambition. We appreciate the recent announcements of the United Kingdom and European Union on their climate goals and aspirations. These pledges must now be turned into new NDCs and net zero pathways in 2020 that are aligned with the 1.5 degree centigrade target. AOSIS expects that by the end of 2020, all major emitters will deliver 1.5-degree consistent NDCs and net zero by 2050 pathways. 6 small island development states have already submitted their NDCs, and others will follow suit over the next few months. This has not been easy for us, but AOSIS has made it a priority. At the United Nations Secretary General's Climate Action Summit in September 2019, we put forward a SIDS ambition package with NDCs as a headline commitment. If the most vulnerable and the least contributors to the problem can do it, even more so then can those better off amongst us. Second, I wish to emphasize the need for increased predictable finance for developing countries to implement their NDCs. This is an existing obligation that developed countries must deliver on and must account for, including their COVID-19 recovery plans. Vulnerable countries have been disproportionately suffering from the escalating climate change and its socio-economic impacts. To put this in perspective, since 1970, SIDS have lost $153 billion due to weather, climate, and water-related hazards, a significant amount given that the average GDP for SIDS is just under $14 billion. Even before the pandemic, SIDS, like LDCs, were struggling to meet development needs. Under the weight of the pandemic's global lockdown, SIDS and LDCs are forced to choose between paying mounting debts or feeding people and saving lives. The international response has been palliative and increases the risk that our countries could face an unforgivable insolvency crisis. We recognize that the entire world is grappling with the far-reaching socio-economic repercussions caused by COVID-19. But there is no rationale for skirting obligations to the most vulnerable. Here, I wish to underscore that response and recovery measures, including stimulus packages and investments, should be aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement and commitments thereunder. Third, drawing on lessons learned from the Placencia Ambition Forum, the PAF, I would like to highlight the need to think about climate mitigation and adaptation at both the economy-wide and sectoral levels. This will be essential to move from high-level political commitments on ambition to actual implementation on the ground. At the PAF, through the targeted sessions on different economic sectors, including energy, agriculture, and transport, we were able to connect public and private actors working in these sectors so that small island developing state countries could better understand the mitigation and adaptation options that were open to them and the cost of these options. I wish to close with a strong call and emphasis on the urgency of action. COVID-19 is the curtain raiser of a much more devastating future if we revert to the mode of business as usual. We must work together. We must bring all that we have to bear on changing the trajectory of the emissions path, bend the curve, end our dependency on fossil fuels, absorb the costs of transformation of our development model now, place the dignity of every human being at the heart of our efforts, and finally, deliver on the promise that the founders of the United Nations made 75 years ago for each and every one of us to live in larger freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Rondo. Can I quickly ask you on this? You mentioned, $153 billion lost. That's a massive amount. And then we also heard that, so many of the AOSIS countries, small islands, they've been able to prepare their NDCs and even revised NDCs. Now, I'm just becoming curious here. When you do that, when you've been able to do that, do you think you've been able to inspire other countries to follow suit? Have they done that?
Well, AOSIS countries continue to be committed to addressing climate change. We realize that there can be no true development and that does not consider resiliency to climate change. Our countries face many threats which include disappearing coastlines, sea level rise, droughts, and increased temperatures. And we realize that many developed countries have shown little ambition with regards to ensuring that we avoid the worst impacts of climate change. As such, we endeavor to be leaders in calling for action, leaders in the development of strategies and plans, leaders in NDC development, leaders in NDC implementation. To AOSIS, this is important since the 1.5-degree report has informed us that there will come a time in which the world will pass a period of no return. The need for our urgent action drives us forward.
Minister Orlando Habit, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Now it is time for the questions coming in from audience. Our first round of questions here is on the theme of jobs and just transitions. So it could be someone, we could perhaps ask Professor Fukuda on this. What's happening in this regard, and in terms of, it's an anonymous question. Is a just transition to the dangerous impacts of climate change possible for vulnerable communities? How can support for loss and damage be mobilized? Professor Fukuda, could you please address that?
Thank you. I think we have to see from the perspective of the adaptation target. In Ethiopia, we know previously our focus was on reducing emission. Now, in our NDC, we have given more attention to adaptation and also transparency. When we consider adaptation, it's creating opportunities for the vulnerable groups in the area of creation of jobs and also building resilience, economic resilience. So if we focus at the local level and take leadership and engage the communities, I think it's possible to change this challenge into opportunities. But the biggest challenge is finance and technology. So we urge all the development partners, and particularly the developed world, to keep up on their expectations and support the initiatives, particularly adaptation in the LDCs. Thank you.
Can I also quickly make a follow-up question here? This is from the online hub for youth via Tinley. So the question is, what are the green career opportunities in LDCs now and in the future? Because youths, they are also looking at it as career. When I interact with youths, so they're talking about in terms of, for example, climate auditing, climate litigation, law students, coming up, engineers thinking in that term. They ask me, what do you think? I mean, there's this career opportunities in this now. This is for Professor Fukuda. I thought of following up with you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Once again, as I mentioned earlier, it's always a matter of looking into the challenge in other perspective. We are not only playing victims, but how can we change this one as an opportunity? The youth can benefit from this one through creation of jobs and innovation. So I think it's how we take up and lead and play leadership role. Otherwise, I think particularly in the area of adaptation, there are a great opportunity to engage youth in the creation of jobs and in building resilience. I thank you.
Mr. Orlando, can I ask you the same question? So when it comes to small islands, even there, I mean, of course, we talk about problems. Definitely, it's a global problem. It's about existence and so on and so forth. But are youths in your part of the world, are they also taking this up as career, even when it comes to addressing this problem? But are they also looking at from that perspective?
Yes, sorry about that. Yes, our youth are really interested. As a matter of fact, they are looking into even areas of forming their own NGOs, looking at how they can participate with government and other entities, maybe in the area of protection, but also in the area of adaptation. Recently, we had a forum where we were planning an agroforestry policy plan for the country, because a lot of young people are interested in reforestation, doing agriculture, but also making sure that it is sustainable, and also looking at the issues of the effect of climate change. So yes, certainly there are many young people who are interested. And as you mentioned, certainly people looking at the area of law and how they can participate in that area.
Maybe I should ask this again. You know, this is purely out of my curiosity to Green Climate Fund Executive Director, Mr. Klimerick. I mean, I know that you've got your process, you've got your entire procedures, protocols, and so on and so forth. But are you also getting to hear from youths directly approaching you, saying that and asking that, you know, here we are, we've got these plans, can you help us? You know, not just for the sake of it, but genuine plans, genuine ideas, they thrashed out, brainstormed, and then approaching you. That might not be following your protocols, but are you seeing that kind of youth from around the world?
I think it's a fundamental question. We have right now the largest cohort of youth in history. And the largest one. We have never had as many young people in history as now. So we have the largest cohort of youth in history. And whether it's to prove the greatest development dividend in history and assure a far better future, or whether it's to prove the greatest development challenge in history, will very much depend on the basically how we empower them and how we skill them. And for me, there is not a single nation, not a single company that should not think about it. Because the COVID-19 with this economic dislocation has only reduced by 7% of greenhouse gas emission. And this is temporary. If we want to address climate change, what we need is basically a societal change. We have to move toward zero emission, resilient society. So we have to take every single sector that we have today and think, okay, what does it mean, construction in changing climate? And so we will very quickly be speaking about different urban forms, different construction material, different type of architecture, different type of skills that will be required to do it. Yes, we speak basically about auditors. The concept of auditors today is you check the books. Tomorrow, an auditor will have to basically assess whether a concern, any kind of concern, any kind of company, has taken into account the physical transition and legal risk associated with doing business in a changing climate. So every single job will have to change. One of the risks we have is that we might end up with both a skill gap where we don't have the right people at the right place, and therefore a huge unemployment gap. So it's a key challenge to make sure that we train our youth today for the right type of skills that we will need for accelerating the transition and having a just transition. And it's for me one of the key concerns, because we know that the development dividends of a technological transformation can take time. In the case of the Industrial Revolution, it took a century. And the Luddites that are often mocked had very good reasons to be worried about their job, the jobs of the kids, and the jobs of the kids of their kids. And so one of our key challenge today is to try to seriously to think about how and what kind of skills do we have to build in our youth. Now, the Green Climate Fund, it's a bit more remote in the sense that we work through accredited entities. We do not originate our own project. If you come to us with an idea, the first thing we will tell you is that check with one of our 103 accredited entities, because we are about co-financing. We are not about creating a new organization in the world. What we want to do is that we want to mainstream climate in the business model of all our partners. But I know that a number of our partners who have youth programs to empower youth, get this question immediately. The future of job. What kind of job should I go for the next 5 to 10 years?
Thank you, Mr. Glimerick. That's really helpful. Now, I have a question for Ambassador Astuto from the EU. Nick Breeze in the UK asks, do developed countries and wealthiest, highest emitters understand that people in the LDCs, least developed countries, are suffering today? Inequity seems central to the inaction we face.
Well, I guess we do. I mean, that's why the issue of an equitable transition is at the core of our strategy in facing climate change. We need mitigation, we need adaptation, we need the transfer of sufficient finance to make this possible. And that's why the European Union is today globally the largest provider of climate finance. And we will continue to do so. We recognize we have a role to play and we will fulfill it.
In this, as a follow-up, so there are two anonymous questions for you. So how is the EU working to support the vulnerable countries, including SIDS and LDCs, through the pandemic and to face climate change? That's one. And the other one, quickly, if I may, is what is the EU doing to drive ambition amongst other OECD countries and ensure that NDCs will be delivered in 2020?
Well, on the first part, indeed, we are facing a twin challenge of a major health emergency, and at the same time, we are still facing the climate emergency, which doesn't simply walk away because we are not looking. So when it comes to COVID, the European Union, since the start, has been promoting a global response to this global challenge, and we have been trying to inspire our action to the principles of solidarity and of cohesion. That's why we contributed to setting up the COVAX initiative, which is the largest world initiative to bring together a range of vaccines, and when these vaccines will be available to make them ready for use at an affordable price and universally also among the poorest section of the world population. And as of today, we are, I think, among the largest provider of international funding to face the COVID emergency. The same is true for the twin emergency, which is climate change. Again, I think we have taken our responsibility as a global citizen very seriously in the European Union. And we are actually, and this brings me to the second part of the question, how to drive the ambition. Well, we are obviously, we have been pioneers in defining our target to make Europe the first climate neutral continent. We are encouraged to see that actually a number of other major players are following suit, and we like to believe that our example has also played a role. And you can rest assured we will continue to be at the center of any in brokering an ambitious agreement in COP26, as we have done in the past edition, in the past COP. It's a major priority for the European Union, its member states. We are working together as Team Europe. We are working together first in doing our homework when it comes to our own ambition in Europe, and I think that's very clearly defined. And secondly, in terms of outreach and in terms of international diplomacy, where we want the international community to come together and to make COP26 in Glasgow a success, because we cannot afford it to be a failure. The cost of inaction would be much higher than the cost of action.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. Can I ask, perhaps Professor Fekudu here, you know, we've been told by several quarters, campaigners, thinkers, that right now we stand at a crossroad. So either we from this point, this crisis will be an opportunity for green recovery, and thus we will be dealing with the pandemic, post-pandemic situation, and at the same time we'll be dealing with climate change. Whereas there are warnings that we hear all these nice words, but in action there are so many actions we see it's going to the opposite direction. And in the name of post-COVID recovery, to reboot the economies, the climate agenda is totally being forgotten. What do LDCs think in this regard? Is this something that you talk about within countries, within your own country or within LDCs? Are you worried?
Thank you. Yeah, LDCs are committed to ambitious climate action at the international level. And LDCs are also taking ambitious climate actions to lead by examples. If you see, most of the countries are in the process of revising their LDCs. It's also obvious that the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has put our most vulnerable countries and their people under severe social and economic pressures. The pandemic has not only exacerbated the existing challenges we have been bearing as a result of climate change, but also threatened to reverse significant economic and developmental gains we have achieved over the past few years. For instance, if you take the case of East African countries, the COVID-related lockdowns across have had devastating consequences. Millions have struggled as East Africa saw the worst floods in 40 years and the worst ever locust infestation. It has also affected the process of numerous climate actions, including the process of NDC updates. However, the push for more ambitious climate action, despite economic strain caused by COVID-19, remains the priority, as one disaster does not wait for the other. And we must find the balance between addressing climate change, since it leads to multiple hazard crises. Recognizing this fact, Ethiopia is pursuing bold climate actions, including the preparation of the 2050 long-term strategy and NDC update, alongside the ongoing concerted global efforts to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. It's our adamant belief that both challenges, climate change and the COVID-19, can be addressed in a green recovery way. Ethiopia's ambitious climate green legacy initiative can be a good example in this context. Besides, the recovery mechanism has to be aligned with the Paris Agreement and other sustainable development goals, as a delayed response is going to be costly and irreversible. In a nutshell, we must not lose sight of our climate action and the goal. Now, more than ever, we need to continue to pursue ambitious climate actions, both at national and global levels, not only to realize the global targets we envisage in the Paris Agreement, but also to prevent the outbreak of future pandemics. So the LDCs are playing a leadership role and not only seeing only the challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Fakido. We have a few questions on the theme of biodiversity and nature-based solutions. As you know, that these are being promoted so often now. Scientists say now they are our saviors. If we don't serve them, then we are doomed, not just in terms of climate, but even pandemic. Well, any one of you could answer this, please. So this is Farzana Fayeja. The question is being asked is, nations which are already carbon neutral with significant forest coverage, will their leaders consider incorporating biodiversity offsetting in their NDCs? I mean, is this something perhaps representatives from international organizations, are you seeing this? Or maybe countries involved? Whoever would like to answer this, you're welcome. Can I nominate anyone? Maybe Mr. Glemerick from Green Climate Fund. Do you see this happening?
We have an excellent example with Bhutan, where you are speaking about the carbon neutral country already today, and that has decided to have to keep 60% of its forest cover to ensure that it remains carbon neutral, and is de facto putting in place a model of bioeconomy that can be reproduced in a number of countries. So on our side, when Bhutan approached us and asked whether we would be willing to support our effort, we immediately said yes. And indeed, I would strongly recommend to all countries that are carbon neutral today to make a similar commitment of keeping a certain percentage of their forest standing and to include it in the NDCs.
Thank you. Once again, maybe this is the final question we have from Aditya Acharya. And I think because it is about developing countries, so maybe Professor Fekudo, you'll have to deal with this once again. So what mechanisms exist in developing countries that ensure that organisms other than humans, now that's important, organisms other than humans are also getting equitable help to cope with climate change? This gives the flashback, of Paris, when I was covering Paris climate change. You remember all those cardboards, glasses of animals. And when I was walking through the corridors, I felt as if they were talking to me, saying that, guys, our stake, we also have equal stake on this planet. Do think about us. I'm frankly, honestly, I'm saying this. So would you please answer this question, Professor Fekudo? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think if we see from the holistic perspective of adaptation, particularly if we take the example in Ethiopia, what we are doing in the area of Green Legacy Initiative, we are trying to conserve the ecosystem by planting trees, whereby all the living organisms and biodiversity are protected. And I think if we see it from the holistic perspective, I think we consider also conservation of the biodiversity, and the conservation of the biodiversity positively contributes to the low carbon and green economic development.
Anyone else would like to add on that briefly? Yes, please. Minister Orlando, you have the floor.
Yes, from our perspective, we, for example, have committed ourselves to the Bonn Challenge, and a small country like ours having about 59% of our land in reserve, and also on the Bonn Challenge, committing to reforestation of 135,000 hectares to start with. But certainly looking at the other animal species, we have to work in tandem with them, because, for example, we have an area where we have jaguars, and suddenly farmers, especially livestock farmers, will say, oh, we have to shoot this one because it came to eat your calf. Well, certainly we have invaded their territory, and so we have to make certain that we give them back some of that land that they used to roam. But of course, we also have to look at the issue of these communicable diseases that are zoonotic diseases that can pass from human to animals. And so we have to work on this concept of the one world and one health that includes both animals and human beings, so that we can live in unison with the animals, because they also provide food. But certainly we have to give them their space.
Thank you, Mr. Orlando. With this, I think I would really like to thank all of our panelists and all participants for those brilliant questions. I'm sure we'll be hearing all these thoughts and ideas and ambitions, of course, in the days to come, I'm sure, but I also equally hope that we'll see actions on the ground, and we will also get to report on those real actions. With that, can I invite His Excellency Dr. Tandi Dorje, Foreign Minister of Bhutan, for his closing remarks, please. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished speakers, colleagues and friends, it is my great pleasure to sum up and make the closing remarks for the Thimphu Ambition Summit. While I would have loved to address all of you in person, circumstances have prompted us to be innovative and different. Indeed, crises come in many forms, but the way we respond should not. We've seen that swift and bold movement is both possible and necessary. In response to this global pandemic, governments have taken rapid action at scale, mobilized vast public resources, responded to the science, and individuals have changed their behavior to minimize the risk for others. It's clear that early and informed action saves lives, reduces costs, and minimizes impacts. While least developed countries have contributed the least to climate change, we suffer the most from its impacts. LDCs across Southeast Asia grappled with unusually heavy monsoon rains this year, the worst seen in decades. Weeks of downpour caused devastating floods and landslides. Sadly, it is estimated that over 4 million people were left homeless across the region as a result. And while floodwaters continue to rise and rivers continue to swell, it is both a reflection and a premonition of the experiences of our fellow small island LDCs. For countries like Kiribati and Tuvalu, the lapping waves from rising seas wash away all that they hold dear, their precious land and homes. On the other end of the spectrum, livelihoods dry up with every drought in Africa. Last year's dry spell meant more than 45 million people struggled to find enough food across 14 African countries. Nevertheless, the least developed countries will not sit back. We are committed to action, to step up our ambition, even though this burden should not be on our shoulders. Today, you've heard strong, inspiring stories from LDC governments going above and beyond their fair share. In the parallel ministerial video platform, we heard clearly the message that a significant number of LDCs are planning to submit new and updated NDCs, adaptation plans, and long-term strategies, and are counting on support from the international community to help implement these plans. 38 of the 46 LDCs are preparing their NDCs through the Climate Promise support. During our panel session, we have learned the best practices and commitments of the leaders, youth, and development partners. Your contributions have inspired us all with creative ideas and strategies, innovative finance options, and commitments for partnerships to support ambitious targets that will enhance the resilience of our countries in line with the Paris 1.5 degrees centigrade goal. I want to personally thank you for your contribution. It is clear that significant progress and action is underway in LDCs, and the support of global climate actors is present. But the discussions have also highlighted that there is a gap in ambition, and we need more ambitious action up to 2030 to take us towards 1.5 degrees centigrade pathways. There is a need for scale-up climate finance, technological and capacity building support to vulnerable countries to accelerate climate action, increase ambition, and build resilience, and the need to prioritize aligning COVID recovery options with inclusive and green economic development pathways. That is why we appeal to all countries attending the Climate Ambition Summit on 12th December to come forward with 1, new and updated NDCs, 2, long-term strategies and adaptation plans, and 3, commitments of support for the most vulnerable. Finally, we appeal to our hosts of the pre-COP and COP26 to set the bar high and make COP26 a turning point to swiftly move our commitments to actions. Colleagues, the least developed countries understand that for addressing the climate crisis, the time for coordinated and rapid action at scale is now. If our acts are put together, a better world and a safer future for all is possible. With that, let me extend my heartfelt gratitude to Excellencies, distinguished panel members, and all those who have joined us today at the Thimphu Ambition Summit. In particular, I would like to thank Mr. Naveen Singh Khatka for kindly consenting to moderate the panel discussion. It was wonderful to have you with us. Let me also thank the Government of the United Kingdom and the Climate Action Support Alliance for generous contributions that has helped us to make today's summit possible. For the innovative way that the summit has been organized, I would like to thank Wazer Events and Wilton Park for designing and supporting the virtual arrangement. Let me also thank the dedicated team from Climate Analytics and the International Institute for Environment and Development for their continuous support and advice. I would like to close this summit with an announcement that the Chair's reflections of the Thimphu Ambition Summit with highlights of this summit and a call for ambition will be available on social media and the LDC Group website. Please take some time to go through it and spread its message as we enter 2021. It will be the critical year for getting on track to a 1.5 degrees Celsius world. Please stay safe. Thank you and Tashidile.